My future sister-in-law said my mother's wedding dress wasn't good enough for her family. I then discovered she had been creating fake text messages to break up my engagement while secretly sabotaging my wedding behind my back. I, 27F, never thought I'd be sharing this story, but the events leading up to my wedding have left me completely heartbroken and revealed a side of my future sister-in-law that I never knew existed. What started as small suggestions about my wedding quickly turned into a calculated plan to take over the most important day of my life. I met James, 29M, 3 years ago at a charity fundraiser. He was volunteering at the event, helping organize activities for children with special needs. As a pediatric nurse, I was immediately drawn to his gentle nature and kind heart. We clicked instantly, sharing the same values and dreams for the future. James comes from a wealthy family. His father owns a successful chain of hotels, and they're well known in our city's social circle. Despite their status, James has always been humble and down to earth. His sister Victoria, 32F, however, is a different story. She's always been particular about maintaining their family's image and social standing. When James proposed last year, I was overjoyed. We decided on a spring wedding, wanting to honor my late mother's memory by getting married in May, her favorite month. Mom passed away from cancer 5 years ago, but she left me her wedding dress, hoping I would wear it someday. It's a beautiful, vintage gown that she had carefully preserved. The problems started during our engagement party. Victoria appointed herself as our unofficial wedding planner, saying she had connections that would make our wedding perfect. At first, I appreciated her help. Planning a wedding while working full-time isn't easy, and she seemed genuinely excited to be involved. But soon, her suggestions became demands. She started changing our choices without consulting us. The intimate garden venue we loved was too simple. She insisted we use her friend's luxury hotel instead. The local bakery that made my mom's favorite vanilla cake wasn't sophisticated enough. She wanted an imported chocolate cascade. Every decision we made was wrong in her eyes. James tried to manage his sister's interference, but Victoria would guilt-trip him about family traditions and expectations. She'd remind him how their mother had always dreamed of a grand society wedding for her children. When I stood firm about keeping some of our original plans, Victoria would make passive-aggressive comments about how I clearly didn't understand their family's status. Things escalated when Victoria started showing up at my workplace to discuss wedding details. She'd arrive during my lunch breaks, armed with magazines and vendor catalogs, insisting we needed to upgrade our choices. My colleagues noticed how stressed these visits made me, but Victoria dismissed my discomfort as wedding jitters. The breaking point came last week. I was at the local alterations shop for my first fitting, bringing my mother's dress out of storage. I'd spent the morning carefully removing it from the preservation box, tearing up as I remembered how Mom used to let me try it on when I was little, the hem pulling around my feet as I twirled in front of her mirror. The dress still smelled faintly of her perfume, lily of the valley and jasmine. Mrs. Chen, the seamstress, has been in business for 30 years and had actually done alterations for my mom's friends back in the day. When I first brought the dress in for consultation, she had teared up, saying she remembered my mother wearing it. She was excited to work on such a beautiful vintage piece, telling me how they don't make lace like that anymore. But when I arrived for my fitting, something was wrong. Mrs. Chen's usual warm smile was missing, and her hands shook slightly as she helped me hang up my coat. Her eyes kept darting to the storage room where they kept clients' dresses, and she seemed reluctant to meet my gaze. "Is everything okay, Mrs. Chen?" I asked, noticing how she flinched when I mentioned the dress. "Did something happen?" She wrung her hands, looking torn. I need to tell you something, but I don't want to cause trouble." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Your future sister-in-law came to see me yesterday." My stomach dropped. "Victoria was here? Why?" Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears. "She wanted me to damage your mother's dress during alterations. Small things at first, a snag in the lace, a pulled thread in the beading. Then bigger things, like accidentally spilling coffee on it or making a wrong cut that couldn't be fixed." I felt like all the air had been sucked from the room. "She what?" "She offered me 3 times my usual rate," Mrs. Chen continued, pulling out an envelope. "Said it would be better for everyone if there was an accident with the dress. She called it embarrassingly outdated and said she had already ordered you a proper designer gown, something more appropriate for your new family status." My legs gave out, and I sank into one of the fitting room chairs. Mrs. Chen hurried to show me texts from Victoria, detailing exactly how she wanted the dress ruined. She'd even sent pictures of the designer dress she'd ordered, a modern, sleek gown that looked nothing like my mother's vintage lace dress. "I would never," Mrs. Chen said firmly, squeezing my hand. "Your mother was always kind to me, even invited me to your 5th birthday party when you were little. I could never destroy her dress. But I thought you should know what your sister-in-law is planning." I was stunned. The dress was the only piece of my mother I would have with me on my wedding day. Victoria knew this. I had tearfully shared this story during our first wedding planning meeting. The fact that she would try to destroy something so precious to me was beyond cruel. I left Mrs. Chen's shop in a daze, clutching my mother's dress to my chest. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely drive. I called James, but it went to voicemail. He was in meetings all afternoon. This couldn't wait. I needed answers now. 20 minutes later, I pulled up to Victoria's house. Her car was in the driveway, and I could see lights on in her home office.